So my name is Elena Keene, and I wanted to do my representation project on To the Bone, which is a fictional movie put on by Netflix describing anorexia, one individual's journey with anorexia nervosa. Sorry about that. So in this presentation, I'm going to go over a little bit of the depiction of the disorder, the etiology or the cause that they listed, some of the impact it has on the individual's life, the resilience, the treatment, the stigma, and then some overall just comments on the compassion and realism of the video. So first up, the depiction. So this girl, her name is Ellen, but she went by Eli. She changed it midway through. She showed very classic symptoms of anorexia nervosa, such as amenorrhea, which is not having a period for several months, lanugo, which is like when there's hair that grows all over your body in thicker amounts to keep you warm. She also has comorbid substance abuse and depression, which are very common with anorexia nervosa, a distorted self-image, excessive exercising. So she did restriction, she didn't purge, she's always freezing. And according to the DSM criteria, these fit pretty nicely. So restriction of energy intake, seen in Eli's case where she kept losing weight. There's intense fear of gaining weight. So Eli's an artist, and you can see even in her artist that she shows that she just prioritizes being thin over anything else. She's obviously preoccupied or disturbed, and that is like her main source of self-worth. And then she doesn't menstruate at all. She can't remember the last time she cycled. She is the restricting type, so during the last 3 months, she has not regularly engaged in binging or purging, so she didn't purge, and she didn't meet either remission requirements during the course of this movie. A little bit of the etiology shared by the movie was a genetic predisposition to depression mainly. Her mother is bipolar, so it could contribute to that. Her mother also had postpartum depression, which the show indicates is the common myth that could cause anorexia. Her mother was like, maybe I didn't love you enough. And we know that's not true, but it's still common in like the general population to believe that. Some social factors that were proposed that were debunked by the show was her stepmom said, your mom's gay, so you might be gay, and so to struggle with those emotions, you decided to not eat. So that's what you deserve because you feel that way. That was pretty fast shot down, but it was an interesting look into like what could people think are the causes of anorexia. There's just social reinforcement, like people telling her, hey, you're so thin. And then as the show said, normal stuff, some harassment, unsolicited dirty talk, brushing against the public, stuff like that, that can lead to a desire to be more culturally acceptable so that doesn't happen again. There's some stress and trauma. Well, when I mean some, I mean a lot. Like they tried to hit this pretty hard. So her parents were separated after divorce, and then her mother came out of this case a few years later. She lives with her stepmom, who she doesn't get along very well with, who's not her real mom, and her father, who doesn't ever see her. In family therapy, they were fighting together in front of her, not even about her, just like making it about them. So obviously she doesn't have a lot of support that way. They just put her in these programs and like, you need to get better outside of the family support. So she doesn't have a lot of that. She used artwork to express herself and her feelings and some of this, like, I need to be thin, some of this pressure. And another girl with anorexia saw it, committed suicide, and wrote about her in the note. So that was another traumatic experience for her. And then I think that this quote from the movie just really summed up how like all this stress and trauma, like she feels like it's all her fault. It's all my fault. I'm not a person anymore. I'm a problem. Like that's kind of the vibe she's getting when your family fights in family counseling. What else are you supposed to feel? Like it's just your fault for all of this stress and trauma happening. So this obviously had major impacts in her life. She's physically sick and shaky, always cold, bruised, and fragile. She can't get pregnant. She has very few relationships and she pushes everyone away. It's hard for her to trust anyone because she's so concerned about them possibly making her change her habits or like judging her for not eating. Obviously, the depression doesn't help in this, the substance abuse, feels guilty, and so that comes out and that she's not deserving of love. She doesn't deserve these other relationships because she knows she's not okay, but she doesn't know how to stop. She had to drop out of college for treatment. She cannot sustain a job, and she's completely dependent on the care of others at this point. Like, she would die if she didn't have the care of others in her life. As for family support, her stepsister actually tells her that she loves her, but she just doesn't understand why she keeps doing this. She's like, "Why won't you try this time?" Her father and stepmom issued an ultimatum. They were like, "You have to go to treatment or we won't take you. Like, we won't love you. This is not unconditional love." Her real mom, birth mother, cannot deal with her anorexia anymore. And because she just couldn't stand to see her dying right in front of me. Like, that was what she said. Like, she didn't understand why Ellen wouldn't help herself. Her sister, as I've already mentioned, begged her to just try this time. And her mother is scared that her daughter just wants to die. Like, there's a point in the movie where Ellen breaks and she's like, I can't, where her mother breaks Ellen by saying, like, hey, if you want to die, like, at this point, it's okay. I don't care anymore, basically. And her sister, we could see this like anorexia impacting the family more because her sister's talking about her experience of like, I look at my prom pictures and all I can remember is the time when that was the time when Ellen was in the hospital. Like, all of these events were colored by her sister's anorexia. So not only did it create a really strained family relationship for her, it colored all the good events of her life. There is some resilience shown in this film, mainly through the support system. So she makes friends at this new group home that she stays at. Luke is the guy in the top left corner, and he tries to help her by like getting her favorite chocolates, getting her things that he knows that she would like to eat. She has a sister who's shown on the right top picture, who truly loves her and tells her that regularly, and they come around each other in this group therapy setting, inpatient, little bit new treatment. And they throw like people baby showers and they cry on each other and they tell each other that you deserve to live. Like, why do we get to do things? Because we deserving of living, we're deserving of being people and loving one another. So a few strengths and resilience. There's a lot of internal struggle. As I already mentioned, she deeply is like touched when her mother suggests that she's made peace with the fact of her dying. And she's like, well, maybe that's not actually the path I want to go. But at this point, she feels it's so out of control that she actually goes into the desert to like die. And she doesn't die in one night. And she goes, well, what can I do now? And so the movie ends there and it doesn't say like she got better. It shows a bunch of relapses throughout. So it's unlikely that actually Eli ever recovered completely, but it does show like there is resilience there. Sometimes you do have to hit rock bottom though. Spiritual strength at a group home, they pray before their meals to a higher power. And there's also like naturopathic and naturalistic approaches to body healing approached in this movie they used a lot of like physical things like hugging and cuddling, and they did like a cradling like they were an infant once again. And then there's some psychological treatment like inpatient therapy, using each other's stories to help them overcome anorexia nervosa, saying, hey, I'm not the only one going through this. And helped individual therapy as well to just say, hey, you have strength enough to overcome, but you have to be the one to overcome. And I feel like that was the piece that Ellen was missing, like that embodied her to have control over something else other than her eating, control over her own recovery. So that brings us to treatment. There were a few barriers, not in financial burden, but in the amount of time it takes to find good doctors. They're just not available. So the openings for quality inpatient care, they were talking to somebody in the waiting room and they're like, we waited 6 months. 6 months with anorexia nervosa is too much. With any disorder, you don't want to wait that long to get into any good inpatient treatment. It's too much. You might not make it. Treatment, Ellen was not in a place where outpatient was a viable option at this point. She wasn't responding to outpatient therapy, and it just wasn't at all helpful with the stress of her family. She needed to gain weight, and then the family was also drained. So Ellen didn't want to go complete outpatient. They didn't have the energy to keep fighting it, along with her comorbid depression and everything. It was just too much. So that's why they all did inpatient. So she had two different types. The first one, she really didn't try. It wasn't great. It was like, just eat more. She got kicked out actually for being a bad influence on other girls and just made her even more obstinate. And the second inpatient was at a group therapy house. And there they kind of took a more, you have to help yourself, but we will be here to help you through this until you get to a certain point. Like once they cross a certain threshold, they will put in a feeding tube. But until then, they're like, we're not talking about food. Like, you eat what you want to eat. If you want to eat just Hershey chocolate bars all day, go for it. Like, we support that because any food is better than no food. And it gives patients like an opportunity to think about something other than themselves. That's a typo for their change. When they're thinking about others, like, how can we help the others in this house by doing chores? How can we focus on helping this lady with anorexia who is pregnant have her baby well and gain some weight for that reason? Then also just helps just stress tolerance. Like, things are hard. The person who was pregnant actually lost her baby, and that was really hard. And so how do you come through that without reverting back to your old habits that feel like coping mechanisms basically at this point? Here's just a brief overview of some of the patients at the group home. There were 6, but I only put 4 up here. So there's Megan, who was anorexic and had, who was pregnant, and then there's Luke, and then Pearl, and then we also had 2 people with bulimia. So there is some stigma. It's kind of a mixed bag of what this movie is portraying. There's like, promotes it because the therapist is like, hey, you're scary, you're not okay. This is what the general population sees. And then it also acknowledges the idea, it doesn't really promote this, but it acknowledges the idea that people who are not succeeding in inpatient or outpatient therapy for anorexia just aren't trying. Like, it's just their fault. They just need to try harder. It challenges the stigma and it demonstrates the very real cognitive distortions of people living with anorexia. I've got it under control. Ellen did not want treatment. It's saying like, hey, we need to push back against this. Just try to say like, they really cannot see it this way. And then it pushes back against the idea as well of like, treatment should be seen as repugnant. Feeding tubes, forced meals, like, we can make this a more palatable thing for everyone involved in a more healthy way. We can say it's okay if you need a feeding tube to regain some of that weight first. Finally, I wanted to look a little bit of compassion and realism. So this show strove for realism and how it portrayed anorexia. It actually tells one of the director's stories of anorexia, and then the character playing it as well had an eating disorder. I'd love to take it to few liberties with the treatment. It's like this new novel treatment. And the thing that I really liked about this show is that it didn't show recovery. It just showed one journey and then the end of that journey where they're not recovered, where they just see, hey, I think it's time for me to, like, I've hit my bottom. I don't know where to go from here. Either I die or I don't. And I think that's powerful. Like, she could still not pull out of this, and it's just really realistic to what is actually experienced in some of the really strong cognitive distortions and feelings that she has. I think it also really well demonstrates the helplessness and frustration and strain that it puts on a family of an individual living with anorexia. And there were a little bit of like ideology things that I thought, well, they're really laying it on thick, but it's okay. Like, they were just trying to justify why she had it. And sometimes it's not that easy. Like, they were saying, oh, this is the explanation, or her stepmom was saying that to the first therapist, and he was like, and she was like, not really. So we can try to, it shows that we can try to assign causes to things that maybe did not actually occur. So I did think it laid on the trauma a little thick, but in some cases, there are a lot of trauma for individuals with anorexia nervosa. Thank you so much.